Good afternoon. Welcome to the second meeting of Senate Committee on Revenue and Economic Development. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Senator Buck,
Here.
Senator Donate, Senator Severs-Gansert, Senator Spearman, Chair Neal. Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to have two presentations today. Our first presentation is going to be for the Department of Taxation, who will provide an overview of its work, and then the second presentation from the Committee on Local Government Finance. I am going to call our first presenter to the table, which is Department of Taxation. I'm welcoming the audience who are listening in, and anyone here in Carson City and Las Vegas. And we will go ahead and proceed. Good morning. Well, really good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Neal and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Shelley Hughes, and I am the Executive Director for the Department of Taxation. With me, I have Yvonne Navarez-Goodson. She's our Chief Deputy. Jennifer Roebuck, who is our Deputy Director of Compliance, and Jeff Mitchell, who's our Deputy Director of Excise and Local Government Services. Thank you for allowing us to present a high-level overview of the department and the tax types we administer. You will likely see the four of us at your committee hearings throughout the session, and we'll be available to answer any questions that you may have on the tax types we administer. Here's our agenda for our presentation. First, we will begin with a brief agency overview. Next, we will give you information regarding our fiscal year 2022 tax revenue and distributions. And under item number 3, we'll go through our major general fund tax types, which include sales and use tax, modified business tax, commerce tax, insurance premium tax, live entertainment tax, real property tax, and the net proceeds of mineral tax. And we will conclude with a discussion on our remaining tax types that are listed here under number 4. As an overview of the department's operations, we perform a variety of functions, including administering 21 different tax types, including 3 fees. We appraise property, we establish guidelines for local governments and ensure compliance with those guidelines. We review local government budgets, and we certify annual populations. Additionally, the department was one of the main revenue collecting agencies in the state, and we collect over 70% of the total unrestricted general fund revenue. In addition to the state general fund, the department also distributes revenue to other sources, including the state education fund and local governments. For fiscal year 2022, we collected and distributed over $9.5 billion in state and local government revenue. This is an increase of over $1.6 billion from fiscal year 21. The department's mission is to provide fair, efficient, and effective administration of our tax programs, and our philosophy is to provide consistent, impartial, and courteous service and treatment to our taxpayers. Our mission and philosophy are what drive the work we do, and the department continually strives to fulfill these objectives. At the beginning of the last legislative session, the department's executive team developed a strategic plan, which included the department goals listed on this slide. Our strategic plan is available on our website. In our strategic plan, you will find our goals with specific action steps, measurements, and benefits. Though I won't read these goals in the entirety, I will briefly summarize them. Goal 1 is to provide uniformity and increase accessibility for our taxpayers on tax laws, policies, and procedures. Goal 2 is to provide education and communication to our taxpayers. Goal 3 is to provide timely, relevant, and accurate reporting. Goal 4 is to attract and retain engaged and empowered workforce. Goal 5 is to create a modern digital workplace. And Goal 6 is to reduce IT backlog and increase efficiencies. Listed on this slide is the members of the Department of Taxation's executive team, a few of which are here today. The Department of Taxation is comprised of 6 divisions and serves as staff to 5 boards and commissions. We currently have 413 positions within these 6 divisions. The Nevada Tax Commission is the head of the department and is one of the boards and commissions that is staffed by the department. The Nevada Tax Commission meets multiple times a year to hear appeals, review and hold public hearings on regulations, and pursue other such actions that are necessary for the operation of the Department of Taxation. And a little later on, you will hear from Marvin Levitt regarding the Committee on Local Government Finance, and that is another committee staffed by the department. This is our contact information. This slide provides our website address, our call center number, and contact information for each of our 3 offices. This slide just demonstrates how much revenue we received in fiscal year 2022 from each tax type we administer. As you can see from this chart, of the $9.5 billion in revenue collected during fiscal year 2022, sales and use tax collections made up $6.6 billion, or 69.4% of the $9.5 billion collected. This slide also demonstrates our distributions for fiscal year 2022. The State General Fund receives 40% of our total distributions, or approximately $3.9 billion. Local governments receive 33.5%, or approximately $3.2 billion. And the State Education Fund gets 24.6%, or approximately $2.3 billion. This slide provides the gross revenues that we received from each tax type we administer, both in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. You can see that we had an increase of approximately $1.6 billion from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, which represents a 20.49% change from one fiscal year to the next. This slide breaks down the total departmental distributions in fiscal year 22. The first column provides the amount of revenue that was distributed to the State General Fund for each tax type. The second column reveals the amount of revenue that was distributed to the State Education Fund from each tax type. The third column represents the amount of revenue that was distributed to local governments from each tax type. The fourth column represents revenue that was distributed to other accounts from each tax type. For example, annually we distribute $150,000 from revenue received from the live entertainment tax to the Nevada Arts Council. These other distributions are provided for in statute, and we'll discuss them in further detail during our discussion of the various tax types we administer later on in this presentation. The fifth column represents revenue that was distributed to the State Debt Service Fund from each tax type, and then the sixth and last column represents the total amount of revenue distributed for each tax type. This is a list of some of the major legislation passed from the 2021 session that impacted the department. SB 389 established provisions governing the licensing and operation of peer-to-peer car sharing and requires the charging and collection of certain fees when a passenger car is shared through the peer-to-peer car sharing program. For those of you not familiar with the peer-to-peer car sharing program, it's a business that connects vehicle owners with vehicle drivers to share vehicles in exchange for money. The state fee for all shared vehicles is 10%, and for any shared vehicle in Clark or Washoe County, there's an additional 2%. These fees are similar to the governmental services fees paid by short-term rental companies. AB 495 provided for the imposition, administration, and payment of excise tax on the Nevada gross revenue of business entities engaged in the business of extracting gold or silver in Nevada. All business entities engaged in the business of extracting gold or silver or both in Nevada and whose Nevada gross revenue exceeds $20 million during the taxable year must file a gold and silver excise tax return unless otherwise exempted. Beginning July 1st, 2023, payments made pursuant to the gold and silver mining tax will be deposited into the State Education Fund. And SB 440, which amended NRS 372.7821 and related statutes, provided an exemption for Nevada sales tax on sales of tangible personal property to certain Nevada National Guard members and their qualifying dependents. The period of tax exemption is on the day Nevada Day is observed, and the Saturday and Sunday immediately following. Members of the National Guard are required to apply for a letter of exemption with the department 30 days before the date of Nevada Day is observed. If eligible, the department will issue a letter of exemption. This bill requires that the National Guard member or qualified dependent make a retail purchase during the sales tax holiday, and they provide that letter of exemption to the vendor. The vendor is then authorized to sell the member or qualified dependent without imposing sales tax on the sale. The vendor is required to retain a copy of the letter of exemption for audit purposes. And then after this bill was effected, it was determined that this bill violated the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Agreement. Nevada is a member of Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Governing Board and was sanctioned for violating the agreement. We have worked closely with the Governing Board to remedy the situation, and the department is bringing SB 50 this legislative session to correct that violation. You will hear more about that bill next week. To give you some background on the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Agreement, or SUTA, as you will often hear it called. SUTA was developed over the course of several years through the joint effort of over 40 states participating in the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Project. Nevada became a full member of the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board on April 1st, 2008. SUTA's website indicates the purpose of SUTA is to simplify and modernize the administration of the sales and use tax laws of the member states in order to facilitate multi-state tax administration and reduce the burden of compliance. SUTA minimizes costs and administrative burdens on retailers that collect sales tax, particularly retailers operating in multiple states. It encourages remote sellers selling over the internet and by mail order to collect tax on the sales to customers living in the streamlined member states. It levels the playing field so that local brick and mortar stores and remote sellers operate under the same rules. SUTA ensures that all retailers can conduct their business in a fair and level competitive environment. SUTA does not override state laws. However, states must comply with the requirements contained in SUTA to be a member state. SUTA applies to the state and local sales and use tax collected by retailers. Chapter 360B in the NRS contains provisions for the implementation of SUTA. Nevada is allowed up to 4 delegates to the agreement, and Chair Neal is one of those delegates. Today, 23 states are full members of SUTA. Now we will get into an overview of our major general fund tax types. On Thursday, Mr. Thauer provided the committee with a comprehensive overview of many of the taxes we administer, so we will try to keep our discussion brief. I will turn the presentation over to Jennifer Roebuck, Deputy Director of Compliance, to begin.
Thank you, Director Hughes. For the record, I'm Jennifer Roebuck, Deputy Director of Compliance for the department. Next, I'll cover some of the major tax types that impact our general fund and other funds. First up, we have sales and use taxes, which comprise the largest revenue category in our state. Sales and use taxes were enacted in Nevada in 1955 at a rate of 2%, and the rate is still 2%. In fiscal year 2022, the department distributed $1.6 billion to the general fund. The sales tax rates that customers see are higher because today's tax rates encompass other components, which I'll cover shortly. Sales tax is imposed on retailers for the privilege of selling property at retail. The sales tax rate is based on the county in which a sale occurs and is applied to the gross receipts from retail sales. Use tax is the counterpart of sales tax. Both tax rates are equivalent and are county-based. Use tax is imposed on the property purchased from a retailer where sales tax was not paid. As an example, consider a purchase that was delivered to a customer in Nevada from a non-Nevada retailer who is located outside our state. If the customer didn't pay the Nevada sales tax, then the customer would pay the state directly, and this would be use tax. This slide gives a high-level overview of the base tax rate for Nevada, which is 6.85%. It's made up of the 2% sales tax, which goes to the state general fund, the 2.6% local school support tax, the 0.5% basic city-county relief tax, and the 1.75% supplemental city-county relief tax. The last component that makes up the sales tax rate is the local option tax. Most of the counties that have additional components in their sales tax rates for a variety of initiatives. This slide includes those components as well as when the rate was imposed. The last rate increase was Clark County, effective January 1st, 2020. Briefly, Washoe County was the highest sales tax rate in the state, but Clark County's last rate increase put them back in the lead. You may have seen this one already. This sales tax map is a visual representation of our state and the various county sales tax rates. So next I'll go ahead and dig into the components that distribute to all Nevada counties a bit more. The local school support tax is 2.6%. The tax was distributed to the State Distributive School Fund until July 1st, 2021, when Senate Bill 543 required the distributions go to the State Education Fund. One distinguishing feature of this tax is the distribution is based on the reporting business's locations. The tax is distributed to the school district in which the reporting business is located. If a reporting business is located out of state, the local school support tax distributes to the State Education Fund. In fiscal year 2021, the school districts received a total of $1.7 billion, and in fiscal year 22, they exceeded $2 billion from the local school support tax. The basic city-county relief tax is 0.5%. In-state sales are distributed to the counties where the sales or deliveries are made. Out-of-state sales are distributed based upon the population ratio through the Consolidated Tax Program to the local governments. The Consolidated Tax Program combines tax revenues, including this one, the Supplemental City-County Relief Tax, and several excise taxes into the one what we're calling C-Tax account for distribution. In fiscal year 21, the basic city-county relief tax transferred to the C-Tax account was $330 million. And fiscal year 2022, the transfer was $391 million. This slide is the supplemental city-county relief, which is 1.75%. The collected revenue is distributed through the C-Tax account by way of a formula. Some counties receive a guaranteed distribution, and the balance is allocated to the rest of the counties based on the distribution formula. In fiscal 22, the total supplemental city-county relief distributed to local governments was $1.37 billion, which was up from the $1.16 billion in fiscal year 21. And finally, this slide gives additional details about the local option, which makes up the tax rates above the 6.85%. The counties have the option to increase their sales and use tax rates for specific purposes by ordinance. For example, above the 6.85% tax rate, Carson City has 4 additional tax components to fund public roads, open space, the V&T railroad bonds, and infrastructure. The combined components make up the 7.6% sales and use tax rate in Carson City. A STAR bond, or Sales Tax Anticipated Revenue Bond, is a way for local governments to finance special projects. These special projects must be located within tourism improvement districts, and there are unique rules for the distribution of the sales and use taxes which are generated there. There are currently 4 of these districts in Washoe and 3 in Clark County. A tourism improvement district has specific boundaries which is created by an ordinance. It's essentially an area where a development is going to be built. NRS 271A.120 state once that a municipality has adopted an ordinance to create the tourism improvement district, they may issue special obligation bonds to finance projects for the benefit of the district. The bonds are secured by a pledge of up to 75% of the sales tax revenues generated within the district for a maximum of 20 years. The Department of Taxation remits the pledged taxes back to the municipality that has adopted the ordinance. The municipality uses the funds to make the payments on their bonds and to pay other expenses related to the district. At the end of each fiscal year, the municipality must return any money that has not been spent to the department. That money is then distributed to the county and its local governments through the normal distribution routes. Modified business tax is imposed each quarter on the gross wages reported by businesses. The category of business drives the tax rate and includes general businesses, financial institutions, and entities subject to the net proceeds of minerals. The general business tax rate is presently 1.378% and is imposed on the reported gross wages less a deduction for qualified health benefits paid by the employer and above a $50,000 threshold per calendar quarter. The rate for financial institutions and entities subject to net proceeds of minerals tax is 1.853% on gross wages with a deduction for qualified health benefits paid by the employer. The modified business tax total distribution in fiscal year '22 was $756 million, which is up from the $591 million in fiscal year '21. This tax is distributed to the state general fund. Modified business tax was enacted in 2003, and the tax rates, deductions, and credits have evolved as a result of various amendments through 2021. In September '22, the modified business tax rate reduction determination was completed per NRS 360-203, which resulted in a rate reduction effective July 1st, 2023. Future rate reduction calculations will not be necessary as the rates have reached the bottom per NRS 360-203. In May 2021, the tax rate was reduced from 1.475 to 1.378% retroactively as a result of litigation. The court ruling required the department to issue refunds with interest to taxpayers for the overpayments during fiscal years 20 and 21. Commerce tax was enacted in the 2015 legislative session. This tax is imposed on each entity engaged in business in the state whose gross revenue exceeds $4 million. The tax rate is based upon the industry that the business is primarily engaged in. In fiscal year '22, the department distributed $282 million to the state general fund. Businesses are allowed a credit against their modified business tax for up to 50% of the commerce tax amount that they paid in the year. In fiscal year '21, businesses claimed $43 million in commerce tax credits against the modified business tax due. In fiscal '22, they claimed $47.8 million. Commerce tax was enacted in the 2015 legislative session. All businesses with gross revenue in Nevada were required to file a return. By 2019, there were 594,605 open commerce tax accounts open. Senate Bill 497 eliminated the filing requirement for those with less than $4 million in gross revenue. Since then, accounts are being closed so that the number of open accounts is less than half of what it was in 2019, with 14,404 returns filed in 2022. And now I'll pass the presentation to Chief Deputy Yvonne Navarez-Goodson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson, Chief Deputy for the department. I'd like to move on to an overview of the insurance premium tax. The insurance premium tax represents a tax that is imposed at a rate of 3.5% on insurers which transact business in the state of Nevada, except for risk retention groups with a rate of 2%. The tax is assessed upon the net direct premiums and net direct considerations that are written. The premium tax is due on the 15th of March each year on the premiums written in the prior calendar year. Insurers who are required to pay a tax of at least $2,000 in the preceding calendar year must pay quarterly tax payments based upon the actual net direct premiums and net direct considerations written for the current reporting quarter. The department distributed approximately $496.13 million to the state general fund in fiscal year '22, which represents an increase in gross revenue of 5.16% over fiscal year '21. Next tax type I'd like to discuss is our live entertainment tax for non-gaming purposes. There are two agencies that collect live entertainment tax in the state of Nevada, both the Gaming Control Board, which collects live entertainment tax at a gaming establishment, and the Department of Taxation, which collects the live entertainment tax for events or activities which occur at facilities other than gaming establishments. Live entertainment tax is collected from owners and operators of facilities where live entertainment is provided or who collect the receipts. The tax rate is 9% of the admission charge to a facility that provides live entertainment in a venue or a facility with an occupancy rate of 200 people or more, and 9% on escort services. The live entertainment tax does not apply to amounts paid for food, refreshments, or merchandise unless those purchases are required to enter the facility for the live entertainment. The funding is distributed to the general fund except for $150,000 of annual distributions to the Nevada Arts Council. This tax is due upon the sale of a live entertainment ticket. As expected, the state experienced a significant decline in LET during fiscal year 21 as a result of the pandemic. However, this tax is far exceeding revenues experienced before the pandemic. The department received nearly $40 million in fiscal year 22. If we look back at the pre-pandemic revenue for this tax, we received approximately $19.16 million in fiscal year 20 and $25.8 million in fiscal year 19. This funding is distributed to the general fund. Oh, excuse me, I already said that, except for the Nevada Arts Council, the $150,000. The most recent change we've seen to the live entertainment tax was an amendment in SB 367 during the 2021 legislative session to exempt live entertainment that is provided by or for the benefit of a governmental entity. With that, we're going to be bouncing around a little bit, but I'd like to introduce Deputy Director Mitchell, and he's going to present our next few tax types, and then I'll return for a few.
Thank you. Jeff Mitchell for the record. I will be introducing a couple of tax types here, and I'll start with the real property transfer tax. The real property transfer tax was enacted in 1967. Tax attributable to the RPTT is what we often refer to it as, was $253.6 million in FY22, which is an increase over the 191 distributed in FY21, or 32.7%. The rate varies. It is $1.95 on each $500 in value for the transfer of real property, except in Churchill and Washoe counties, where the rate is $2.05, and Clark County, where the rate is $2.55. This revenue is collected by the county recorders and remitted to the department on a form prescribed by the Nevada Tax Commission. The distribution is $1.30 to the state general fund, 55 cents is distributed to the counties through the consolidated tax, or CTX, and 10 cents is distributed to the account for low-income housing. Churchill and Washoe counties distribute the additional 10 cents for the Local Government Tax Act, and Clark County distributes the additional 60 cents of its rate to the school district. Next slide, please. This slide shows a breakdown of where the tax is collected. As you can see, Clark County accounts for about 75% of this tax. Next, I'll talk about the net proceeds of minerals. The net proceeds of minerals is a tax calculated on mining operations gross yield minus certain allowable deductions, and that equates to the net proceeds. It is timed, and the tax rate is not to exceed 5%. The department determines the tax on the net proceeds of minerals pursuant to NRS 362. Producers report annually the gross yield of each separate extractive operation, as well as expenses related to the extraction, processing, transportation, and marketing of the mineral. Royalty recipients also report to the department, but they only report the amount of gross royalties received. The minimum tax rate is 2%, or the combined property tax rate where the property is located, and the maximum tax rate is 5%, which is applied to the net proceeds in excess of $4 million annually and to all royalties. Currently, taxpayers are required to estimate the current year taxes, and then the department certifies and bills the net proceeds, and tax due each year is due on April 20th, with the final payment due by May 10th. There are approximately 103 net proceed operators currently reporting to the Department of Taxation, as well as 388 royalty recipients. Next slide, please. This slide shows the table of the tax rate. The tax rate for the net proceeds of minerals can be quite complicated. It is on a sliding scale, which is determined by the net to gross ratio, except for properties that exceed $4 million, and that is taxed at 5%. Here we see which minerals the net proceeds is generated from, with the majority, 89.41%, coming from gold and silver. The distribution of the net proceeds of minerals total for fiscal years '22 was $174 million, where the general fund received approximately $71 million, local governments received approximately $96.5 million, and $6.4 million was distributed to the State Debt Services Fund. Due to the passing of Senate Bill 3 from the 31st special session, net proceeds on minerals taxpayers currently make a prepayment on the general fund portion of that tax rate. I will now introduce a variety of other tax types that the department also oversees and administers. And I will start with cigarette and other tobacco products. This slide details cigarette and other tobacco products. It was enacted in 1947. The tax rate is 90 mils per cigarette, and other tobacco products is 30% of manufacturer's wholesale price. The distribution is 5 mils per cigarette to eligible local governments through the consolidated tax distribution and 85 mils per cigarette to the state general fund, less the administrative fee that is determined by legislative appropriation that funds the enforcement efforts of the department. Other tobacco products is distributed to the state general fund. Assembly Bill 535 of the 2019 legislative session revised the wholesale cigarette dealer licensing fee and established licensing fees for cigarette manufacturers. Wholesale dealers of other tobacco products and tobacco retailers are outlined, with cigarette manufacturer's license being $1,000, wholesaler dealer of cigarette license being $650, wholesale dealer of other tobacco products being $650, and tobacco's retailer's license being $50. In the 2019 legislative session, Senate Bill 263, vapor products and alternative nicotine products were added to the definition of other tobacco products. That includes electronic cigarettes, cigars, cigarillos, pipes, hookahs, vape pens, and similar products and components. The effective date was January 1st, 2020. The taxes collected for other tobacco products saw an increase from fiscal year 2021 of $3.4 million, and this is a 10.57% increase. Taxes collected for cigarette were $162 million in 2021 and decreased to $153.5 million in 2022, for a decrease of negative 5.55%. I will take a brief breath, and then I will start into the liquor taxes. This slide details the liquor taxes, licensing fees, and fines. This tax was originally enacted in 1935 as a stamp tax. Liquor tax rates is $3.60 per gallon, over 22% alcohol content by volume, and then over 14 to 22% alcohol content volume is taxed at $1.30 per gallon. Alcohol content of 0.5% to 14% is 75 cents per gallon, and beer is 16 cents per gallon. Continuing the discussion on liquor taxes collections, this outlines the different rates that I just talked about. And the next slide, total taxes, fees, and fines for fiscal year 2022 were $56.5 million, where $50.39 million was distributed to the state general fund and $4.6 million to local governments, with $1.47 million to the liquor program account, which is for the victims of domestic violence community juvenile justice programs. I will now turn it back to Deputy Director Yvonne Navarez-Goodson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson, Chief Deputy for the department. On our next slide, I'd like to go over our cannabis taxes. So starting up first, we have our retail cannabis tax. In fiscal year 18, the department started collecting an excise tax on the retail sale of cannabis or cannabis products by a retail cannabis store for adult use of cannabis in Nevada at a rate of 10% of the sales price. As of fiscal year 22, the revenue has been distributed to the State Education Fund. Prior to fiscal year 19, the retail cannabis revenue was distributed to the account to stabilize the operation of state government, also known as the Rainy Day Fund. And on July 1st, 2019, the revenue was distributed to the state distributive school account. Oh, tongue-tied. In fiscal year 22, the department collected approximately $89.31 million, which represented a 3.06% decrease in collections from fiscal year 21 of $92.14 million. However, this is an increase over collections that we saw in fiscal year 20, in which the department collected $60.41 million. In addition to the retail cannabis tax, the department also collects a wholesale cannabis tax, which is an excise tax at a rate of 15% of the fair market value of cannabis or cannabis products at wholesale. This includes both medical and adult use cannabis. The tax is imposed solely on the cultivation facility and is levied only on the first transfer or sale of the cannabis. In fiscal year 22, the department collected $63.02 million, which was a 3.95% decrease from fiscal year 21. Notably, the department collected $44.77 million in fiscal year 20, which was a 1.3% increase over fiscal year 19. Since July 1st, 2020, the wholesale cannabis tax revenue has been distributed to the Cannabis Compliance Board for the following expenses. First off, it's its operational expenses, which includes the CCB's administrative costs that they impose for applications, licensing, agent cards, time and effort billings, and civil penalties. The next $5 million is distributed to the local governments, and any remaining funding is distributed to the State Education Fund. The medical marijuana tax that became effective on April 1st, 2014 has now been replaced with this excise tax on the wholesale cannabis tax structure. Moving on to our next tax type, we have, and Director Hughes already gave you a pretty good overview of this, but this is the gold and silver excise tax that was implemented in 2021. Through the enactment of AB 495 in 2021, which has been codified as NRS Chapter 363D, it imposes an excise tax on businesses engaged in extracting gold, silver, or both in Nevada with a gross annual revenue exceeding $20 million. This tax is generally referred to as the GSET. The tax rate is 0.75% of the taxable revenue up to $150 million in gross revenue, and 1.1% of all gross revenue in excess of $150 million. The GSET applies to each calendar year, and these taxes are reported on April 1st for the immediately preceding year. In fiscal year 22, the department collected approximately $36.92 million from the GSET for the first taxable year in 2021. Next, we're going to discuss our lodging taxes. Our lodging taxes are imposed on the gross receipts from the rental of transient lodging. These taxes are remitted to local governments, and certain percentages are distributed to the Department of Taxation to be distributed to the Tourism Promotion Fund and the State Education Fund. The county boards of commissioners are responsible for the imposition and collection of the lodging tax, while the Department of Taxation records and transfers the revenue to the appropriate budget accounts. There are 3 rates imposed for the distribution to the state. The first is a 1% rate of the gross receipts in a county with a population less than 700,000. The second is a rate of 2% of the gross receipts in a county with a population of 700,000 or more. And finally, the third is an additional tax of 3% on the gross receipts in a county whose population is greater than 300,000. The distribution includes, next slide, thank you. The distribution includes, for various counties, in counties who have a population of 700,000 or more, the distribution includes 3/8% to the state to fund the promotion of tourism. The remaining 5/8 of that 1% is distributed to the county treasurer for the county school districts on capital projects. In counties whose population is less than 700,000, we have a 3/8% distributed to the state to fund the promotion of tourism. The remaining 5/8 of the 1% must be deposited with the County Fair and Recreation Board, or if no such board exists, then to the Board of County Commissioners for use in tourism in that county. The additional 3% tax in counties whose populations are greater than 300,000 is remitted to the State Education Fund. Our next tax, well, actually, previously we've been discussing the imposition of taxes, but now we're going to transition for a few of our fees that the department administers. So state law imposes a fee of 10% on the lease charge on a short-term rental of passenger vehicles. 2 counties also impose an additional fee. Washoe County imposes a fee of 2% on the lease charge, with 0.25% of that amount distributed to the Department of Taxation for its collection. And Clark County imposes a fee of 2% of that lease amount, with 0.1% of the amount given to the department. The revenue from these fees is distributed to the State General Fund and to Washoe and Clark counties. As our director also mentioned in her opening remarks, 2021 brought forth the peer-to-peer tax, which is also equivalent, or excuse me, it's really a fee, government services fee, brought forth that bill. I won't go ahead and repeat that, but we'll be prepared to take questions if there are any after that, so I won't duplicate her comments on the peer-to-peer. And finally, for me, I wanted to give you a quick overview of our transportation connection tax. The legislature created this tax in 2015 to impose an excise tax on the connection of a passenger in Nevada by a transportation network company, common motor carrier of passengers, or taxi cab at a rate of 3% of the total fare charged on the transportation. There are actually 4 types of entities in which this tax may apply, or circumstances in which this tax may apply. The first is for a transportation network company. 3% tax is imposed on the use of a digital network or software application service of a transportation network company to connect a passenger to a driver on a total fare charged on the transportation services. Our second connection type is for the autonomous vehicle network companies. This is again a 3% of the total charge for transportation services through the use of a dispatch center, software application, or other digital means by an autonomous vehicle network company to connect a passenger to a fully autonomous vehicle transportation service. Our third type is the common motor carriers of passengers. Again, like all other types, it is a 3% tax rate on the total fare charged for transportation services on the connection. Again, whether by dispatch or other means that is made by the common motor carrier of passenger to person, or to a person or operator willing to transport the passenger. And finally, for our taxi cabs, we also have the 3% of the total fare charge for the transportation on the connection, whether by dispatch or other means made by a passenger or to the taxi cab willing to transport the passenger. This tax is due and payable monthly, and the first $5 million of each biennium is distributed to the Highway Fund, with the remaining distributed to the State General Fund. With that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to our Deputy Director Mitchell.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Mitchell for the record. I will speak to the bank excise tax. This tax is imposed on each bank at the rate of $1,750 for each branch office in excess of one maintained by the bank in any county in this state. It was originally acted during the 2003 session of the state legislature, and it is effective January 1st, 2004. The tire fee, which is Chapter 444, I might have thrown too many fours in that NRS, Nevada revised statute. This is a fee imposed on the retail sale of a new tire at the rate of $1 per tire. It was originally acted during the 1991 legislative session, and the amendment in 1993 per Senate Bill 97. Exhibition facility fee, Chapter 360-760, exhibition fee of $5,000 if paid annually or if paid quarterly. The fee is equal to the number of businesses without a state business license taking part in each exhibition. The distribution is to the state general fund, and I'm moving quickly through these. I hope that's okay. Okay. Thank you. Lastly, I will speak to two different areas again within the Department of Taxation. This is commonly referred to as centrally assessed property. The Department of Taxation is responsible for the valuation, assessment, collection, and distribution of property taxes related to the property of interstate or intercounty nature. This includes properties such as airlines, railroads, power companies, any property that crosses state or county lines. These funds are distributed mostly according to the local property tax rates, the state debt service fund, and the renewable energy account, and then a small portion to the general fund. And lastly, speaking about local assessment and the department roles with local assessment, the locally assessed property section within the department oversees and monitors the quality of assessments performed by county assessors. Staff appraisers do performance audits of different valuations that the county assessors do and determine a ratio that is presented to the tax commission where they can monitor the quality of those assessments to make sure there's equity amongst all the different counties. We publish these out on our website and they're available for review. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Hey. All right, members, any questions? I have lots. You want me, okay, Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my questions are probably very pedestrian, so just bear with me. So you mentioned the minerals tax, coming out of the ground, and I'm wondering about lithium. How is that taxed? Is that taxed like a mineral? Is that taxed like, I don't know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Mitchell for the record, to you and through you to the Senator. Yes, lithium is considered a mineral and it is subject to the net proceeds of minerals tax.
And so they would have to comport with the same prepayment? Yes? Okay. Second one, you mentioned there's a difference in tax on beer and like whiskey. So why is that different?
So the tax rate, Jeff Mitchell for the record, thank you, Madam Chair, to you and through you to the Senator. Liquor taxes is taxed at the alcohol content of that liquor, and so the rate structure varies depending on the alcohol content.
All right, so any additional questions? Okay, so I'm gonna just jump from what I want to talk about. Okay, so on like slide 15 and 16, so, in several presentations we've had, everybody sees that big number in the sales and use tax, right? And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe we're relying so heavily on sales tax. But what I do want you to talk about is, is our sales tax really regressive, right? Because we do exempt a lot of things out. And what is driving that number is consumer activity. It's not that our rate is excessively high, it's that there is a large amount of activity that is moving within that space, right? And so when we just talk about, economics, that's what I want you guys to get into, because I want to demystify sales tax. And so that folks are like, oh my God, I can't believe like 90% of the, and you'd be like, is it though? Yes, that's the revenue being generated, but it's not a high tax.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shelley Hughes for the record. And yes, you are correct. And I often think about how that rate went down during the pandemic, the sales and use tax taxable sales. However, with the passage of marketplace facilitators and Wayfair, we did see an increase with the online sales. In fiscal year 2020, marketplace facilitators reported tax of $108 million. In fiscal year '21, it was $203 million, and then in fiscal year '22, it was $231 million. So during the pandemic, I think Nevada really benefited for having that law in place. So when online sales were occurring and your brick and mortar sales were closed down, we weren't able to collect that, that revenue.
And thank you for that, because I think people miss that there is a tie to consumer activity and there is an economic relationship to what's happening in sales tax. And at the end of the day, right, if we had consumers that were locked in the house, they were spending online. And so they were going to spend some way or another. They weren't going to work. And then what we know is that we had a large group of people who retired. We had people who had pent-up savings that were able to go and say, you know what? I'm actually going to spree it up today, right? We knew, seriously, during COVID, there were stories where people were literally going to Home Depot and they were like, I am finally going to do that backyard. And we saw the benefit of that relationship, but I'm only saying this because I've heard several comments like, why are we overly relying on sales tax as our general fund revenue? And it's not that we are pushing people to say, hey, go spend, right? They are spending and we are benefiting from a consumer activity. That doesn't mean that we are overly taxing citizens in the state of Nevada. And so I just want to, I'm on my soapbox, but I just want to make that statement. And then I had another question on slide 21, and this is on the CTAX, the supplemental, the SCCRT. So I know the guaranteed counties have changed. So who's in and who's out now?
Madam Chair, Shelley Hughes for the record. I will have to get back to you with that information. I do know that 2 of those guaranteed counties came off last fiscal year, but I do not have the names of the counties that are still on the guaranteed county list.
And just really quick, because I'm asking, but we have new members, just really quickly, what's a guaranteed county? What's a non-guaranteed county? So I'm not going to make you go deep, but I think it's appropriate to help the committee understand what that means.
Shelley Hughes for the record. So, want to jump in or do you want me to take it?
Take it all correct.
Okay. I'll have Deputy Mitchell correct me if I misspeak. So we have several guaranteed counties that will receive the same amount of revenue from the CTAX distribution formula, even if they don't make that amount from their sales tax revenue. Sometimes they make more, but they get that guaranteed amount. If you're a non-guaranteed county, you get the amount that you, am I saying it wrong? that you generate through your county.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Nakamoto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Michael Nakamoto with the Fiscal Analysis Division. To answer the question that you asked about the guaranteed counties, currently there are 6: Esmeralda, Lander, Lincoln, Mineral, Pershing, and White Pine are all in guaranteed status.
Okay. And it's really important to know that, because I think one of the drivers was this increase in sales tax, right? Which took them out of a guaranteed status, and it was because economic activity increased. The question I think that's important for the committee is that if there is a decrease in their sales tax, can you walk backwards, right? Is there a reversion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Mitchell for the record. Yes, the guaranteed status for these counties was kind of enacted because, especially with volatile sales in counties. And that tends to occur more frequently in rural counties that are heavily reliant on mines, where they may spend a lot in one year and not in the other year. Once a county goes off of guaranteed status, there is not a way for them to come back on to guaranteed status. So they may exceed what their true portion of sales tax would be in one year, or they may be way down in a different year. But with guaranteed status, they get that and they can plan on it year after year. And so if a county anticipates that they're going to continue to exceed that amount, it is up to their decision to make that request to the Nevada Tax Commission. But once removed, there is not a reversion where they can come back on.
Okay, thank you for that. Take mental note of that fact. So on slide 27, does anybody else? I'm just gonna do what I do. But slide 27. So in GovRec, we know that there's a bill to raise it to 6 million. How many taxpayers are going to be relieved from filing if it goes from the 4 to the 6?
Madam Chair, if I could maybe refer to your fiscal team. They've been working with our economist on these numbers.
I can go to my next one and we can come back, Mr. Nakamoto. I can circle back. Okay, I'll circle back. So I have another question on page 30. So on the real property transfer tax, the breakdown goes $1.30 to state general fund and then 55 cents to consolidated tax and then 10 cents to the account on low income housing. So being that you're the collector and then it distributes from your office, do you know how much the 10 cents is generating for that low income account?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Mitchell for the record, and I see that your fiscal staff is looking for that number for me. Most of these distributions are actually from the county recorder's office straight to the state treasury. So we're a pass-through for some of that revenue, and it looks like he might have an answer, if I may defer.
Okay.
For the record, Michael Nakamoto with the Fiscal Analysis Division. In FY 2022, the amount generated from that 10 cents for the Low Income Housing Trust Fund was just over $13.8 million.
$13.8 million, that's statewide. Okay. Question, Senator Ganser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then I don't know if you have this answer or if we have to talk to the Housing Division. Does it eventually go to the Housing Division? Is that used to bond or to create some of the programs that they have to leverage funding, federal funding, to make sure we can build more housing? So is it bonded, I guess, is the main question.
Thank you, Jeff Mitchell. Through the record, to you and through you, I don't know the answer to that question, and I apologize, but I can research that out.
Thank you.
I think, yeah, that's a really good question, because the 10 cents is just kind of low, but, you know, there's a bill on that. So I want to go to page 37. This is the OTP. So in the revenue chart, it's roughly about 32 million that it just said for OTP. But for vape particularly, is that in that number or is vape a separate number?
Madam Chair, Shelley Hughes for the record. Vape is in the OTP numbers. We do not have a way to separate it on our returns.
To know how much it's generating? Okay. Okay. And then my next is on I'm going to take these two together, the retail cannabis and the wholesale cannabis tax. So both on the chart were down by about a -3%. And I know that there was a recent change to then put some of it in the general fund, and then cannabis, CCB gets a portion for their administrative fee. Is that -3 an indicator of the redistribution to the education fund? Or is it because economic activity slowed in '22?
Madam Chair, Shelley Hughes for the record, it is the latter. It's because economic activity slowed down.
And I wanted to ask about that because I've been reading a lot of articles, and even before, I think even during COVID, after COVID, there were articles popping up that cannabis is not, I guess, generating the amount of revenue that people believe that it would because of the high taxation, that companies are claiming that the taxation is kind of pushing out, or I would say, reducing the revenue generation that they can have as a business, and that there is a need to do some reformation on what is a new industry, because it's really new. And there's been huge conversations about, I think particularly in Colorado, I think they're called MedMen, where literally they're saying like they were at $1 billion before, and now they're at like 1 point something million in their revenue, and they're claiming that the cannabis tax is the cause of that. Now, they're not in this state, but I've heard some of our retailers make that argument. And so I don't know if has that come up? Have people discussed, the rate itself is driving them out of business?
Madam Chair, Shelley Hughes for the record. We have talked to several industry members, more on the wholesale tax rate rather than the retail tax rate. They are wanting to pursue some change with that rate. I'm not sure if it's, I know in California, they did away with the wholesale rate altogether. I'm not sure if, that's something that would be beneficial for Nevada. But I have heard rumblings from the industry regarding.
Members, do you have any questions? Because I have Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Neal. I was wondering, when was the consolidated tax formula calculated last? Has it ever been recalculated? And then what is the process for recalculation?
Madam Chair, through you to Senator Buck, Shelley Hughes for the record. Senator Buck, I don't have that information in front of me, but I can gladly get that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You have the answer on the other one? Okay.
Apologies, Madam Chair, for the spotty Wi-Fi in this room. For the record, Michael Nakamoto with Fiscal Analysis Division. We have been working with the Department of Taxation staff to get an estimate of the effect of the proposed change to the commerce tax by the governor. And we were working with FY 2022 taxpayer data. So had that change been effective in FY 2022, the information we got from the Department of Taxation indicated that there were 7,900 taxpayers that actually filed a commerce tax return and paid the commerce tax in FY '22. There would have been a reduction of approximately 1,600 taxpayers. It was very close to 23% of the taxpayer base would have their commerce tax liability eliminated completely. But every single one of those taxpayers would have had their liability reduced based on that additional $2 million.
Interesting. So that's really good to know. But I know in the commerce tax, we don't capture it by, I know we capture it by revenue, but not size of employees that they're, if you're making 6 million. Okay. But there are a lot of exemptions and pass-throughs on that money. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nakamoto, for that information. Senator Spearman, and then after that, I just have one more question, then we'll go to the next presentation.
So, a commerce tax, one of the things that I asked when we were discussing it is, the NAICS and how people can move from one category to another and to reduce their tax. Have you all seen much of that, or?
Madam Chair, through you to Senator Spearman, Shelley Hughes for the record. We did, in the beginning, when the commerce tax first was implemented, we did see people asking to change between NAICS codes. That has dwindled a bit, but we still get applications asking to change from one NAICS code to the next.
Thank you, Madam. I was going to say thank you. She used to be my chair. Anyway, so on page 50, this exhibition facility fee, you remember the bill last session, 21, and I believe it came down to whether or not there was legislative intent to include conventions. So is this the fee that basically excluded like the trade shows and conventions that were happening on the Strip, and that's why we see the reduction in this number?
Madam Chair, Shelley Hughes for the record. You are correct. The bill that we saw last session was exempting those that participate or organize trade shows for the commerce tax purposes. They became exempt business entities and no longer had to pay the commerce tax. This exhibition facility fee is separate from that.
Okay.
So.
I was wondering, because there was this, it wasn't really generating a lot, but it's like, now it's like $36,000. So I'm wondering who was removed. And so I was just wondering, like, which conventions are in there, because the statement that was made the last time, and it's good to know that, we needed to provide relief to bring back that business. And so I was just wondering what was the overlay with that facility fee. Okay. I'm just gonna say this to the new members on this committee. Like, I'm always looking to try to find out, like, after we pass legislation, what is the effect to that revenue stream? Whether or not it increased, decreased, because it matters, right? And so I know in tax land where you're like, oh, I'm listening to all these presentations, but revenue drives a lot of what is going on in the state. But you can make a policy change that will decrease activity, but it may also be a driver of another economic related use, right? And so sometimes when you see these breakouts, sometimes you have to think about what is the economic activity that it is associated with to determine, your conversation around it. Like, what is it there for? What is it supposed to do? Economically, what is it changing for a business? Why is that business even being asked to pay a tax? And what would be the purpose behind, the public policy purpose behind that, right? Because ultimately, the state is responsible for paying for services. So you have to figure out how that's managed. And so when you take things in and out, there is a balancing act. But I just want to say that because I know that, majority are new on the committee, but I think when you start to think about it in economic terms, I think it will help you as we move through the session and you see bills. Always think about, is there a business on the other end of it, right? What's the effect of the policy on that business? Why are we moving that policy, right? The other could be, is there a need to make some kind of adjustment in revenue needs? Is there a change in the economic behavior where now we need to now capture a new behavior that is going on, that consumers are doing to help to stabilize what the state may need? Because the future says if we don't capture this new consumer behavior, we're going to lose money, right? And so those are also important conversations to think about as well. And so I just wanted to say that to try to just frame it up. Because it seemed like I was the only person that was going, I had questions on every slide, but I'm going to close this out. I want to say thank you, number one, Director Hughes, for presenting this this presentation and the slide for us, because it was helpful for me to re-see it. And then we will move to, are you going to be at the table is it going to be a combined for Mr. Levitt?
Mr. Levitt will be
Okay.
Yvonne will be doing his slideshow.
Okay, so we're going to go to the second presentation of Committee on Local Government Finance, presented by Chairman Marvin Levitt.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. For the record, my name is Marvin Levitt. I'm chairman of the Committee on Local Government Finance. And I would like to review with you some of the responsibilities of the committee, to talk about its membership, and then talk about a little bit about how we react to with the Department of Taxation, discuss a little bit about how our role when governments are in financial trouble, as well as, in the end, I want to talk about the revenues local governments receive and how some of those came about. This first slide is, as you can see, the Committee on Local Government Finance was created under NRS 354-105. Interestingly enough, when it was originally created, it was called the Local Government Advisory Committee. And its responsibilities were increased, and eventually the name was changed to the Committee on Local Government Finance. The committee has 11 members, and the Department of Taxation, by way of their local government division, provides the staff for the committee and does a lot of extra work. And the committee is required to meet not less than twice per year, and we normally would meet about 4 times a year. Let's go on to the next slide. The member appointments come from 3 members each from the Nevada League of Cities, the Nevada Association of Counties, and the Nevada Association of School Boards, then 2 members from the Nevada State Board of Accountancy. On the next slide, there's a list of who's on the committee. We've got a representation both from large governments in the committee and smaller ones. When I saw this chart, it almost scared me, because I looked at myself and I saw that I've been a member of the committee for 47 years, which is a long time. The members of the committee have over 100 years of service on the committee in total. So you can see we've had a fairly stable relationship. Let's go on to the next slide. The Department of Taxation does a lot of things as relates to local governments. They oversee progress of local governments. As you know, they review all the local government budgets and the audits. They ensure that they're accurate, that they comply with NRS, and they alert the Committee on Local Government Finance when they have problems with entities, whether they relate either to their financial condition or whether we have problems with compliance with law or regulation, or we have problems with internal controls as they relate to the local government. And they will schedule appearances with these local governments before the committee, which we have on a regular basis. We have local governments that appear before the committee. Let's go on to the next slide. We have responsibility for relating to policy decisions and fiscal administration of chapters 350 and 354, as well as advising the Department of Taxation on matters of local government fiscal administration. Now, practically speaking, we prepare, approve regulations as they relate to local governments. And in the past, over the years, we've approved a number of regulations as they relate to implementation, of course, of these chapters of NRS. The current time, our regulations are somewhat limited. We react to laws passed by the legislature, and we have recently we enacted a regulation that relating to fund balance and the ability of employee groups to react to that. And so that's something is fairly regularly. Let's go on to the next slide. The major revenue sources for local government are one are ad valorem taxes, that next the C tax, which is the basic city county relief tax, the supplemental city county relief tax, the government services tax, the real property transfer taxes, liquor and cigarette, licenses and permits, intergovernmental revenue and charges for services. I might just talk a little bit about a couple of these. The ad valorem taxes at one time were the major source of revenue for local government. And I think, as many of you are aware, back in 1981, well, back in 1981, there was we had Proposition 13 in California that had passed. We had a rapidly rising assessed valuation pretty much throughout the state. And the legislature in 1979 had reduced property taxes by essentially reducing the dollar on this that the schools receive from property tax, and they had essentially made that up out of the state budget. The state had a surplus at that time, and in the 1979 session, they reduced property taxes and made up that difference through the state, essentially through the state budget. We continue to have that high inflation. The people in the state in the 80 election had approved had approved a similar question here. And so then the 1981 session, there was a proposal by the governor, and it was acted on by the legislature, that there would be a substantial reduction in property taxes throughout the state, particularly as it relates to local government. Then that difference would be made up by an increase in the city county relief tax. There had been a basic city county relief tax, as the department had talked about. It had been in effect since the 1960s of one half of 1%. And then the supplemental city county relief tax was enacted in that 1981 session of the legislature. And it was at the rate of 1.75%. And it had a direct offset against property taxes. So there's a substantial decrease in property taxes as they're related to the supplemental city county relief tax. Now, one of the problems, I happened to be involved in this at that time. One of the problems we encountered when we tried to devise that, of course, is that each county had a different relationship between how much sales tax was bringing in the county and how much property taxes would bring in the county. We had some smaller counties that had fairly good assessed value, but very, very small amount of sales. And so as a result of that, when that bill was developed, it came about, we had these guaranteed counties, as you previously discussed. And that helped to level that playing field when they lost property taxes because of the big reduction. And so that's one of the things that came out of that. And the government services tax, of course, as you well know, is the tax on motor vehicles. And the C tax right now makes up I would say, is by far the largest component of local government revenues. If you could turn to the next slide, there's an illustration that shows how the relative size of each one of these taxes relates to revenue coming in, and you can see the supplemental city county relief tax is by far the largest, and the basic city county relief tax is next. So between those two, they comprise a substantial portion of the revenue coming from this C tax. I might mention that the distribution of this C tax has been changed a couple of times, but the way the formula essentially works is that the tax distribution is adjusted every year, and it relates to growth in two things. One, in population of each individual entity, and one, change in growth in assessed value of the entity. So the C tax is based on the distribution. This is distribution within a county. So it can change every year, and does change every year, by how each individual entity relates to all the others in relation to their growth in these two factors. And of course, within these taxes, their distribution is somewhat different. The basic city county relief tax relates to tax collections within a county, and supplemental by that formula that was previously discussed. Let's go on to the next slide. They're in the statute, something that's called fiscal watch. And I sort of need to talk about three things that exist among local governments as it relates to fiscal watch and severe financial emergency. That we would, a number of years ago now, we had problems with essentially at that time it was the White Pine County School District. And they had reached the point where were almost unable to meet, or were going to be unable to meet payroll. And this happened during a legislative session, and so a bill was devised at that time for what was called severe financial emergency. Talk about that in a few minutes. And then a little bit later, there was a feeling that we might have some entities that were not in severe financial emergency, but that they had situations existing in those entities where they need to be placed on something called fiscal watch. And then besides that, we have local governments that might have some problems, but they're not ready for either fiscal watch or severe financial emergency. And those come before the Committee on Local Government Finance, as recommended by the Department of Taxation on a regular basis. And so we might see someone coming as a result of an audit report that shows an over expenditure of a function. Or we might see internal control problems within an entity. We might see somebody, particularly on a county level, that's not reconciled bank accounts relating to the distribution of all of their taxes. And so those kind of things we might have come before the Committee on Local Government Finance. And they will come and we will question them as to what they are going to do about fixing those problems particularly before the next audit. We've also had some problems with local governments as they relate to not getting their audit reports in on time, and so that's another thing that but then when the situation gets severe enough, they can actually be placed on fiscal watch. And at that time, they come before the committee at every meeting, and we provide guidance for them as to what they need to do, with the threat always of the being there, I suppose, that if they don't respond to that, they can be placed on severe financial emergency. The normal process for a local government to get on fiscal watch is the Department of Taxation brings the situation to the attention of the local government, Committee on Local Government Finance. The committee would then, if they agree the situation is severe enough, they would recommend to the executive director of the department that they be placed on fiscal watch, and that can happen. I give you one particular example I think it might serve to illustrate this. A number of years ago, we had a situation in North Las Vegas where we'd gone into a recession, and most local governments had cut back on expenditures fairly substantially and had maintained fairly significant fund balances, or had not showed a rapidly reducing fund balance. But in North Las Vegas, for whatever reason, they had actually increased expenditures, and we see a rapidly deteriorating financial condition. So they were placed on fiscal watch. And as they came before the committee, we outlined to them what we wanted them to do. We outlined what they needed to do, and of course, and then told if they did not do that fairly quickly, then they would be placed on be recommended to be placed on severe financial emergency. Let's go to the next slide. On severe financial emergency, the Committee on Local Government Finance essentially recommends to the Nevada Tax Commission that they be placed on severe financial emergency, and at that time, the Nevada Department of Taxation essentially takes over the management of the local government, particularly as they relate to financial matters. And so they approve everything from payroll to all expenditures. But in the case of North Las Vegas, they responded favorably to what had been requested, and we saw their financial condition improve on a regular basis. They would come before the committee, and we would go over in detail with them what they were doing, what their financial condition was, and as a result, they were able to be taken off off fiscal watch after several years, and they returned to good financial health. So I think we've seen by a number of local governments, we've had others that have gone into this too, like Nye County went into it. We've had others too, as over time, and I think we've seen in the practical aspect of this that they have overcome their financial problems and have gone back to financial health as it relates to these things. And the application of this has been approved by the legislature. Let's go on to the next slide. There's a whole list of conditions that can exist in local governments based on the severity of the condition, and to determine whether they should be placed on severe financial emergency or fiscal watch. We've listed some of the most common ones there. Ending fund balance of the general fund of the local government has declined for the past 2 years. The local government has insufficient cash to meet required payroll payments in a timely manner. The audit report shows funds with deficit balances. Local government has not corrected violations of statute or regulations pursuant to their audit report. The local government has incurred debt beyond its ability to repay. And there's a whole list of these conditions that were developed initially because of the need to act almost immediately because of what I mentioned before, the White Pine County School District, because they were in such condition where they were almost unable to meet payroll. Now they, of course, again, have did improve to the extent that they were, after a while, were able to be taken off from this severe financial emergency. And their finances have been good since, but I think we see that the process has worked really well as relates to these local governments where we've seen they've gone into trouble. Just as a sideline, when we were developing this on this severe financial emergency, I was one of the ones working on it. I was in Carson City representing the city of Las Vegas at the time. And I stayed a weekend up there and I wrote out these 27 conditions, and amazingly enough, all 27 of them got passed and put into the bill. Let's go on to the next slide. I just want to make a general comment about the current financial conditions of local governments. I think right now the financial condition of local governments is good. I think all of you are aware about the condition of the state as relates to revenues, and the local government finances follow fairly similar. The major revenue of local government finances, you can see from what I've talked about previously, is sales tax. And of course, the largest revenue for the state is also sales tax. Now, one substantial difference between local government and the state is the state receives a substantial amount of revenue from the gross gaming tax, which is not a major source of revenue for local government. And of course, on the state level, that gaming tax has done very well. But also local governments. Now, one difference between local governments on a practical basis in the state is the fact that, of course, the state has revenue estimates you'll receive essentially on May 1st from the Economic Forum. And then that revenue estimate is not officially where you're on a two-year basis. It's not essentially changed until the Economic Forum meets in December of the following year. like it did this last December. But local government, of course, has an annual budget where the state does it on budget every 2 years that you meet. So the local government responds. So the local government a year ago would have responded when things started to improve. So even though they improve, it doesn't hit. It hits every year instead of every 2 years is the way, because of the way the state, when you meet as the legislator. But in general, I would say the financial condition of almost all local governments in the state is quite good right now. Now, the problems we have seen with local governments that have come before the committee in recent times does not relate to financial condition as much as it relates to, we've seen some violations of statutes like over expenditure. We've seen some internal control problems. We've seen late audit reports. And those things, we are working with the local governments to resolve those problems. But that's still a little different situation than when they're in severe financial condition. I'd like to go to the next slide. I'd like to talk about a sort of a typical, what does this typical LGF meeting look like? And I've gotten an agenda so you can just sort of see. And we have, this is the roll call, the public comment. Then we have financial condition report by the department. And it relates to, sometimes relates to improvement districts, sometimes relates to cities, counties, school districts. And most of these things I have previously discussed with you as they relate to local governments and the problems they may face that would come before the committee. And we will have these local governments appear in person and answer to the committee as to why the problem exists and how they intend to resolve it. Then, of course, we might have an approval of a regulation. But that's essentially what the Committee on Local Government Finance does. I might just mention that we have had an exceptionally good relationship with the Department of Taxation. They have provided good and accurate information to the committee. And we have had, I don't know how we could have a better working relationship with the department than what we have had. They provided information as requested and do all of the detail work as relates to the committee. Be happy to now answer any questions you might have if I can.
Thank you. Any questions? Well, I want to say this. Number one, thank you for presenting. Number two, have you considered putting your oral history, or have you already done it, at UNLV, where you have gotten your oral history captured? Because I think you need to put that on the list for this year. Because 47 years of local government finance, you are institutionally ingrained in the information. And I think we need to have your commentary and history recorded, not just in this committee, but so people can go to UNLV and be able to pull down that video and watch and listen to everything that you have to offer in terms of history, knowledge, and information, because it is rare and we are losing those individuals in our community.
It's kind of, it's funny how things work out with an individual. I'm back in November, November of 1978, the city manager asked me if I could go to Carson City for 2 weeks in the 1979 session. Well, the 2 weeks ended, and I spent throughout all of that session, and I spent full time at every legislative session for the next 30 years. You know, it's funny how things like that work out, you know, that you don't plan. And of course, when I got there in 79 was right at the time when we when we reduced the property tax by $1. Well, actually $1.36, where we got the $3.64. We reduced the dollar coming out of the schools, one the mandatory schools, one the not mandatory at that time, but that was $1. The state levied 25 cents, and then the state required a 11-cent distribution from the counties, so that's $1.36. That, of course, is how we got the 364, because we had been at $5 previous to that. Anyway, I've not thought about recording all of that. Maybe I should, but I haven't.
Yes. Members, any questions? I know I have one, and it's, you guys are, I know we have to get out of this committee, but I just have one question. So on the assessed value for the cities, how often do we get the update of the new construction that they may have done in 12 months? I know that CWIP, or I'm calling it CWIP, happens on one side, but I'm wondering if it happens at the local government side where we get that 12-month construction or work in progress, or does a city come in and report that information to you guys so you can at least know, you know, there is going to be a growth that is going to occur because they're doing a lot within their city limits?
Now, we had, of course, a local, Madam Chairman, but of course, the local government knows because of permits and such, how much growth there is within local government, but we would receive, of course, on an annual basis, like everyone else, a report from the assessor as to what the total assessed valuation was. I might make a comment about property tax. I think all of you are aware of it. But property tax, of course, at one time was the major source of revenue for local government. And then it was reduced, you know, to the schools, reduced by $1 in 79, and then reduced substantially again in 1981 when we had that imposition of the city county relief tax at the rate of 1.75%. And then we had the situation as it relates to where we had the rapid growth in assessed valuation as it relates right before the recession in 2008. And we had that rapid growth in assessed valuation, so there felt the need to place some restriction on how fast that could grow. And then I think something happened that none of us anticipated. I was involved there at the time, and I did not anticipate what was going to happen, and I don't think anyone else did. But when we had that 2008 recession, we saw, particularly in the large counties, a rapid decrease in assessed value. And when you do that, of course, property taxes went down as a result of that. But then the assessed valuation grew grew back to where it previously was. But since, of course, there have been limitations placed on the growth, where it was that, you know, as you well know, that 3% on residential and 8% on business property. And so that the property taxes, in a way, have never really been able to recover to where they were previously. And so they become a much smaller portion of local government budgets. And on the state level, of course, you mainly see it through the schools and extra funding required by the state because of that. But anyway, local governments, now property taxes, which have become was just previously the major source of revenue, and still an important part of it, but it simply does not grow. Not like the other taxes we've seen.
Thank you for that, Mr. Levitt, and thank you for your presentation and coming out today in the afternoon. I enjoyed it. I'm going to emphasize again, go get your oral history recorded. I think you'll enjoy it. And thank you so much for offering your time and knowledge to this committee. I thank you a lot.
Thank you. I'll be in Carson City in a few months because I have to be there for the Economic Forum, which I happen to be a member of.
So you're going to, well, you'll miss the snow, hopefully. So swing by.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, members, I think that's our close of our presentations. I don't know if Department of Tax, you had any closing comments or no? Okay. So we will close our presentations. We will go ahead and open up for public comment. Is there any public comment here in Carson City? Seeing none. BPS, is there anyone on the phone?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. And so we are adjourning Senate revenue.